Hi, I'm Asha, and I wasn't always the family disgrace. But the night I brought the man I loved to dinner, my mother looked at him like dirt under her shoe. My father slammed his whiskey glass so hard, the table shook. "So that's all you could get?" she sneered. "You're the disgrace of this family," he shouted. No one flinched. No one defended me. They had rehearsed this ambush, humiliate me, break him, and remind me I was only welcome if I played small. But then, Merrick walked in, and everything changed. Because sometimes the quietest one at the table is the one holding the match. And when the lies started unraveling, it wasn't just my dignity they tried to bury. It was the truth. What happens when a daughter they tried to erase remembers who she is? Stick around. You're going to want to hear this. I pulled into the driveway slower than I meant to. The porch lights were already on, glowing a soft gold against the crisp Connecticut dusk. My parents' house hadn't changed. The hedges still too perfectly trimmed, the windows spotless like they'd never dared witness a family argument. I sat there for a second, staring at the front door. My fingers drummed the steering wheel. The engine hummed beneath me like it was holding its breath, just like I was. I stepped out, heels clicking against the slate walkway. The air carried that familiar blend of burning firewood and dying leaves. Late autumn, the kind of cold that made your lungs ache just enough to remind you you're alive. Inside, the scent hit me first. Lemon polish. That same sharp tang from the furniture wax Mom used since I was a kid, back when I still believed it masked warmth rather than control. I hung my coat carefully by the door, brushing imaginary lint off my sleeves. Then I walked into the lion's den. The dining room was warm, well lit, and entirely too quiet the second I entered. Everyone was already seated, except me, of course. Lorraine, my mother, turned her head just slightly, her eyes grazing over me like I was a dress rehearsal for something better. "You made it," she said, voice as tight as her cheekbones. "Alone, I see." I smiled, small. Traffic was a bit much, Merrick's parking. She blinked once, slowly. Victor, my father, sat at the head of the table, as always. He didn't stand, he didn't smile. Just nodded, like I was the third option on a takeout menu he'd already decided against. The others murmured greetings. My older sister Marion gave a soft wave, too absorbed in her wine. Her husband, Tom, smirked. I took my seat. Far from the center, of course. End of the table, near the wall, like an afterthought. I didn't complain. I just folded the ivory napkin across my lap. Its folds were crisp. Clean. It grounded me. The dinner chatter resumed, like a play I'd wandered into mid-performance. "So," Mom said, her fork clinking against porcelain. "Merrick's still working. What is it again? Sheet metal?" I kept my voice level. "He runs a fabrication business, actually. Custom design." "Oh," she nodded, lips tightening. "So he's still welding." From somewhere down the table, someone chuckled. A cousin, maybe? Or Tom? I didn't look. "He's quite talented," I added, choosing my words like glassware. "Built his company from scratch." Tom leaned forward, his tie slightly askew. "Men like him don't usually survive nights like this. We're a tough crowd." "Not everyone measures strength in wine pairings, Tom," I said, still smiling. They laughed like I'd made a joke. The meal moved forward. Roasted duck, glazed carrots, judgment, served hot. Then, out of nowhere, a voice behind me. "Oh, are you with the catering staff?" I turned. A cousin I barely knew, Nathan, Nolan, holding a glass of something amber. He gestured at my seat. "You're kind of tucked back here." No one corrected him, not even Mom. "Oh, don't mind her," someone said. "She blends right in." Laughter again, not cruel, just careless. I didn't flinch. I just reached for my napkin again, smoothing it flat. My knuckles whitened, but I didn't speak. Not yet. Honestly, Dad suddenly boomed, I don't know what happened to you. You used to be bright, promising. Now, you marry someone who works with his hands and hide in corners at your own family dinner. I looked at him, really looked. His jaw clenched, his glass empty again. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck, but I didn't let it touch my voice. I didn't know love had to be impressive, I said. That's not love. That's desperation, he snapped. You've embarrassed this family. My heart thudded once, hard. Not from pain, from clarity. Because in that moment, I realized something. They weren't trying to get me to explain. They wanted me to shrink. But I didn't. I sat straighter. I smoothed the napkin again. I looked at each of them, my mother, her perfectly arched brow, my sister sipping away her indifference, my father puffed up with disappointment. And I thought, you have no idea who I am anymore. And then, the door behind me creaked open. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoed into the dining room. Every voice cut off, even my father's. I didn't have to turn around. The shift in the room's oxygen told me exactly who had just walked in. Not because of noise, Merrick was never loud, but because of how still everyone became. Even the clinking of silverware stopped, like the house itself was holding its breath. He walked in, wearing his usual navy jacket, the one with the small oil stain near the cuff, barely noticeable unless you looked too hard. His shirt was clean and pressed, collar stiff, like he knew this crowd would be searching for flaws. Merrick didn't hesitate. He didn't pause in the doorway or wait for permission to exist. He scanned the room calmly, nodded politely to no one in particular, and walked straight to me. His hand grazed my shoulder as he passed behind me, pulling out the chair next to mine like he'd done it 1,000 times before. He sat, easy and sure, like he belonged. And somehow, that made it true. I heard the faintest intake of breath from my mother. Her pearl earrings tilted as she leaned toward Marion and muttered, "He should have used the back entrance. That's where the staff goes." She didn't whisper to be discreet. She whispered to sting. The comment hung there, sour, bitter, floating just above the duck and roasted potatoes. I froze. But Merrick, he didn't even blink. He turned his head, eyes steady, voice calm. "I'm a guest here, Lorraine." That's all he said. No raised tone, no sharpness. Just a clear declaration that couldn't be argued. It was the first time I'd heard someone use my mother's name like that. Like she wasn't untouchable. The air got dense. She drew back, lips parting slightly like she wanted to scold him, but didn't. She adjusted her fork instead. From across the table, Tom chuckled nervously, trying to cut the tension with a sip of wine. "Well," he said, "looks like we're all getting comfortable tonight." Merrick didn't answer him. He reached for my hand beneath the table and held it. Not tightly, just enough to remind me he was real, present, unshaken. My stomach twisted, but not out of shame this time, out of anger. Anger I'd buried under politeness and avoidance. Anger that had never been allowed at this table. My father cleared his throat and leaned forward, elbows creaking on the table. "So, Merrick," he began, tone somewhere between condescension and interrogation, "remind us what exactly it is that you do. Welding, right? What kind of future does that build?" Merrick leaned back, resting one arm casually on the back of his chair. "I own a custom fabrication company. We design architectural features, large-scale sculptures, and restore antique metalwork for historic sites." Dad's brow twitched. "So, you're a metal artist?" "You could say that," Merrick said evenly. "But I also run payroll, manage supply chains, and employ 13 people. We've doubled revenue every year since we launched." It wasn't defensive. It wasn't cocky. It was just the truth, and that somehow made it louder. The waiter came by with the next course, setting wine glasses down. He hesitated, checking the label on a bottle. "I think this one's for," he began. Before he could finish, my mother waved a hand. "That's the wrong one. Just give it to him," she said, nodding toward Merrick, "and let him take it back to the kitchen." There was a beat of pure silence. Merrick looked up from his plate. His voice, when it came, was steady and low. "I'm a guest here, Lorraine." The waiter froze. My mother's smile faltered. She picked up her glass and drank quickly, as if swallowing what she wanted to say. Something cracked in the room, not loudly but decisively, like a shift in weight you didn't notice until everything tilted. My aunts stared, pretending to be engrossed in their salad. My cousins stopped whispering, and I felt something inside me expand. All these years, I'd been the buffer, the excuse, the translator between them and Merrick. And yet, here he was, meeting their contempt without flinching, without needing me to explain or soften or shield. He didn't need their approval. He didn't even seem to want it. That kind of strength. It made me see every part of myself I had dulled to survive this family. I had folded myself into someone small just to keep peace with people who didn't know the first thing about respect. I looked down at my napkin again, the same one I'd smoothed earlier when I was trying not to cry. But now I held it differently, fingers steady, grip firm. My father, clearly losing patience, leaned in again. "So, Merrick," he said with a sneer, "what do you really do? I mean, when you're not playing with metal scraps. What makes you think someone like you belongs at this table?" Merrick inhaled slowly. I felt his shoulders relax next to me, then he smiled. And I felt the quiet shift in him before a single word left his mouth. His shoulders settled, not in defeat, but in the way someone prepares to speak truth with no fear of how it will land. That was the moment something in me steadied too, as if I'd been waiting for this exact breath my entire life. "What I do," he began, his voice even, "is industrial fabrication. It's a skilled trade, requires licensing, precision, and more responsibility than most people realize." He didn't lift his chin or posture like he was trying to win anyone over. He simply stated it, like he didn't owe an apology for the kind of man he was. My father leaned back, unimpressed. "Sounds like a fancy name for heavy lifting," he muttered. "Still manual labor." The words hit me in the same place they always had, right beneath the ribs where embarrassment and anger sit together like unwelcome roommates. But this time, instead of shrinking, something inside me pushed forward. I felt it in my spine, in my jaw, in the way I didn't drop my gaze. Before my father could continue, Merrick rested his hands lightly on the table. "Last quarter, I supervised a major safety overhaul for Dynatech's new facility." A beat of silence passed before my cousin Dean froze mid-chew. "Wait, Dynatech? The robotics plant?" Merrick nodded. "Yes." The room shifted, just enough for me to feel the wobble in their confidence. They all knew Dynatech wasn't some local repair shop. It was a national name, a company people bragged about being near, even if they only passed the building on their commute. I caught my mother's expression, tight, irritated, as if the story had slipped from her hands and refused to return. Seeing that look pulled me backward into a memory I tried for years to bury. The first time I brought Merrick home. Fall leaves still clinging to his boots from the walk up the driveway. My mother standing in the foyer with her usual hostess smile, the one she only wore for people she already approved of. She held out her empty glass without a second thought. "Would you mind getting me a refill?" she said. She thought he was staff, not because of his clothes, not because of confusion, but because of assumption. Assumption about men who worked with steel, with tools, with effort you could see in their hands. And I had stood there, silent, frozen, too conditioned to choose calm over dignity. I blinked back into the present, watching him now, solid, unbothered, entirely himself. And the collision of past and present nearly stole my breath. My father drew in sharply, trying to regain ground. You expect us to believe you passed up better opportunities? That doesn't add up. I turned down a corporate offer, Merrick said simply. I prefer real work, the kind where your character matters more than your suit. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. That kind of humility wasn't supposed to hold more weight than their credentials. Yet here it was, clean, honest, undeniable. And there, for the first time that evening, I saw it. The first crack in my father's confidence. Small, but there, like a seam beginning to split. The table quieted, forks paused in midair. My father leaned forward again. If your work is so important, then why were you late? Most men would take a night off for a family dinner. Merrick met his stare. Someone on my team made an error near an active weld. I stayed until it was safe to leave. I don't walk out when people rely on me. The implications sank in. Responsibility, not ego. My father sat back, unable to counter that without sounding petty. I looked at the man beside me with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Every insult they'd thrown at me for marrying him clattered through my memory like dropped silverware. Every smirk, every whisper, every moment they dismissed him, and me by extension. And then the quieter truths, rising like water. The evenings he came home exhausted, but still helped fix the loose cabinet hinge. The way he spoke to strangers with respect. The way he never once acted ashamed of me. My guilt came next, heavy, but honest. For all the times I let their voices drown out my own. For every moment I dimmed myself to avoid conflict. But under that guilt, pride flickered, then grew. I felt it rise inside me like a tide finally moving in the right direction. Just when the tension finally seemed to settle, my sister leaned forward, folding her hands neatly in front of her, wearing the same smile she used on people she planned to corner. "So," she said, her tone syrupy sweet, "if your work is so impressive, show us something. Proof, maybe?" My heart thudded once, hard. My sister never asked a question without sharpening a blade behind it. Merrick didn't tense. He didn't glance around. He just shifted slightly, as if he had expected this moment all along. He looked at me, and in that split second, I knew whatever happened next was not going to be what any of them anticipated. He slipped his hand into his jacket. The sound of the room falling silent felt heavier than fear itself. It wasn't just quiet, it was the kind of stillness that happens right before something breaks. No one moved, not even the air. Merrick reached into his jacket pocket, calm as ever, and pulled out a folded envelope. No dramatics, no grandstanding, just purpose. He placed it gently on the table, his fingers pressing it forward like he was setting down a playing card he knew would win the hand. My sister's mouth twitched, a smirk dancing at the corners. She was sure he'd embarrass himself. Probably thought it was a paycheck or some note scribbled in crayon about how hard work builds character. Merrick looked at my father. "You asked for proof," he said, voice low and even. "Here it is." My father didn't reach for it immediately. His eyes narrowed. Suspicion was his second nature, the first being control. But finally, with a dismissive sniff, he picked up the envelope, tore it open, and unfolded the papers inside. His eyes scanned the page once, then again, and then they stopped moving. "What is it?" my mother asked, still holding her wineglass as if it were a microphone for her disapproval. He didn't answer. His lips pressed into a tight, unreadable line. I leaned slightly toward the document, catching a glimpse of the state seal at the top. I knew that emblem. We'd seen it together weeks ago. It was real. Merrick turned to the rest of the table. "It's a formal recognition letter from the State Safety Board," he said. "They named me lead foreman on the Dynatech project. We prevented a chain reaction that could have injured a dozen men. That decision was mine. It was the same tone he used when telling me we needed new brakes on the car. Steady, factual, no show. A fork dropped. I think it was Aunt Jean's. Dean, my cousin who rarely spoke unless it involved sports or stocks, sat up straighter. "Wait," he said, pointing. "Is that the incident they covered on Channel 8 with the gas line pressure fault?" "That's the one," Merrick said. Dean blinked. "Damn, that was serious." My sister looked suddenly interested in her wine. My mother's face held the same expression she wore the time I brought home a B+ in high school. Not rage, not sadness, but deep personal disappointment, as if I'd done it just to spite her. They didn't say anything at first. Instead, they shifted. Literally. Chairs scooted, glasses clinked. Their discomfort smelled like overcooked green beans and old family photos, things no one wanted to deal with. Then came the fake praise. "Well, that's impressive," Aunt Jean said, voice flat. "I think I saw that on the news," my sister offered, as if trying to loop herself into credibility by association. My uncle nodded like he'd known all along. It was almost funny, watching them scramble. Almost. But it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. My heart swelled with something jagged. Pride, yes, but also ache. Because the room only believed Merrick's worth after it had a stamp and a signature. That's when it happened. My father slammed the papers down, the sound cutting through the polite chaos like a judge's gavel. "Recognition doesn't change what you are," he barked. "You're still not good enough for my daughter." The room gasped. Or maybe it was me. My mother didn't flinch. My sister's smirk returned, satisfied like a cat that had waited for its prey to come back within reach. The words hit me so hard, I felt the humiliation crawl under my skin like cold water. Merrick didn't react, not visibly, but I saw his jaw tighten, not in anger, in decision. My father leaned forward again. "You're after our name, our family's money, that's what this is, and she's too blind to see it." I didn't look at Merrick. I couldn't. My gaze stayed fixed on the napkin in my lap, now crumpled in my palm. My fingers trembled. I'd heard so many versions of this over the years, not always spoken aloud, but always implied. Every holiday dinner came with some comment meant to remind me I was the family's weakest link, the one who didn't marry well, the one who didn't shine bright enough, the one who didn't push back. As a child, I'd learned silence kept the peace, but that silence had cost me more than I realized. Now, with Merrick beside me, steady as steel, I felt something shifting. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was something deeper. The quiet rumble of anger, long held back, finally finding its voice. I looked around the table, scanning their faces. Faces that never really saw me, only the version they'd created. And I realized I was done being that version. My father sat back, waiting for me to defend him, waiting for me to stay small. But I didn't. Not this time. My fingers gripped the edge of the napkin as I breathed in slow, preparing to speak. Not just speak, but release years of carefully packed silence. I opened my mouth. "Asha," my mother cut in, sharp and loud, like she saw it coming. "Don't embarrass yourself. Let the men handle this." And just like that, the dam inside me shattered. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped the floor with a harsh screech that seemed to vibrate through the bones of everyone in the room. No one spoke, not a breath. They were bracing, because deep down, they knew. Something was about to shift, and it wasn't going to be quiet. I stood slowly, steadying myself with one hand on the back of the chair. I could feel every eye on me like heat lamps. My mother tensed, lips parting as she whispered my name like a warning shot. My father didn't flinch. He folded his arms, leaned back in his chair, and gave me that look I'd known all my life, the one that said, "You'll fold, you always do." But I didn't. I let the silence stretch. I wanted them to sit in it, feel it. Then I said it, clear, louder than I meant to. "You don't get to decide my worth anymore." The words weren't meant to be theatrical. They were survival. I'd carried that sentence inside me for decades, letting it rot behind my ribs. The room froze. My sister rolled her eyes. "Oh, please," she muttered, like I was throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. I didn't even look at her. This moment wasn't for her. It wasn't for them. It was mine. Then, from the end of the table, a voice piped up. It was Stephen, my mother's second cousin or something, the one who'd once mistaken me for staff. He chuckled softly. "Maybe you're overreacting a little," he said, tipping his wine glass. "People like Merrick belong in service roles. It's not an insult. That's just life." I felt it like a punch, square in the chest. That word, belong, like someone had just drawn a chalk line around us on the floor. I gripped the edge of the table. The napkin I'd clung to earlier lay wrinkled in front of my plate, discarded but not forgotten. I saw it for what it was now, not something to ground me, but something I'd use to keep myself still. Not anymore. Around the table, some cousins exchanged glances. A few looked uncomfortable, suddenly aware of the weight of the moment. Others, my aunt, my sister, shifted their bodies just slightly toward my father, like players realigning on a field. My mother's voice cut through the tension. "Asha," she snapped, "sit down before things get worse." I turned my head. "Worse for who?" She blinked, not used to being questioned, especially not in front of the full family. Her lips tightened. Then my father stood, abrupt, loud. The chair behind him thudded back against the wall. He jabbed a finger across the table, straight at Merrick. "A man like him will only drag you down. He'll ruin everything we built." His voice shook the water glasses. Nobody laughed. Nobody even breathed. Merrick didn't move. He didn't raise his voice, didn't meet the anger with anger. He just looked at my father with the kind of calm that made him look 10 feet tall. That calmness bolstered me. I looked my father dead in the eyes and said, "The only thing ruining this family is your pride." The words were sharp and the effect immediate. My sister gasped like she'd just witnessed a car crash. "You're unbelievable," she spat. "Ungrateful. They gave you everything." No, they gave me conditions, and I'd accepted them, quietly, for years. Holidays full of side-eyes, birthdays with barbed compliments, apologies I never got, questions I never asked because the answers were always laced in shame. I felt a tremble in my voice as I spoke again, not fear, just the adrenaline of finally doing it. "I'm done trying to earn a place I never truly had." The room tilted, not physically but emotionally. I could feel it, the shift, like a tide pulling back before a storm. A realization hit me like ice in the chest. They were never going to choose me, not me, the real me. They wanted a version of me they could mold, silence, decorate at dinner like a vase. And I'd tried, God, I'd tried, but I was done. I lowered my head for a second, not in shame, but in grief. I was mourning the girl I used to be, the one who spent years trying to shrink enough to fit inside their idea of love. I stepped back from the table, turning just slightly toward the hallway, toward the door that led away from all this. I was ready to leave. That's when my mother fired the last shot. "If you leave now," she said, her voice cold and clear, "don't expect this family to welcome you back." I stopped, every part of me stilled. Her words hit something inside me deeper than rage, something older, that primal fear of being alone, cut off. But before the fear could root itself, I felt Merrick stand behind me. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His hand touched the middle of my back, steady and sure. And in that single gesture, I knew. Everything was about to change. His hand on my back wasn't forceful. It was steady, warm, anchoring me in a room that had done everything it could to unmoor me. I felt him step just a little closer, as if to let me borrow his balance. My father's stare hardened at the sight of it. The rest of the table shifted, shoulders tightening, expressions sharpening, as though everyone sensed we had crossed into unfamiliar territory, one where I wasn't backing down and Merrick wasn't intimidated. My mother folded her napkin with slow precision, the same way she folded anger into quiet, polished sentences. When she finally looked up, her voice was calm in a way that made the air feel brittle. "We didn't raise you to shame this family. If he truly respected you, he wouldn't have let you settle for this life." The blow was subtle, but it landed harder than anything she'd shouted during my childhood. It wasn't loudness that hurt. It was the elegance of her disapproval. Before I could respond, my sister leaned back in her chair, unlocking her phone. "You want to know what kind of life she settled for?" she said, her tone sharp enough to cut. With a swipe, she cast a photo onto the dining room television, a picture of Merrick from years ago, covered in dirt and grease after a double shift, exhausted but still smiling. The room tittered with thin, uneasy laughter. I felt my stomach clench. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was intention. A coordinated humiliation meant to corner him, and by extension, me. Merrick didn't react. He took in the photo, then let out a slow breath, the kind you take when you know exploding will only feed the fire. Somehow, that restraint made my pulse steady. I turned toward my sister. "Why do you need to tear down a man you barely know?" She lifted her eyebrows, wearing a practiced expression of false concern. "I'm protecting you. Someone has to." Protecting me. That was rich. She'd spent our entire lives weaponizing advice to keep herself elevated. My father nodded at her, proud of what he probably saw as loyalty. Then he rose. The movement was sharp, deliberate. His voice carried across the table like a command. "You don't belong at this table," he said to Merrick. "Real men provide. Real men don't hide behind their wives' families." He stepped closer. "If you're not taking advantage of her, then show us your finances." My breath caught, not because of the audacity, but because the cruelty was calculated. This wasn't curiosity. It wasn't caution. It was an attempt to strip him down in front of everyone. The room responded in subtle but unmistakable ways, shoulders aligning with my father, glances passing like signals, a quiet wall of judgment forming beside him. A few relatives avoided looking at me entirely, as if distancing themselves from my side of the table would spare them from being dragged into the storm. And that was when I understood something painful and cold. They would rather fracture me than lose authority over me. Merrick didn't answer the demand. Instead, he turned to me. His expression wasn't fearful or angry. It held a question, a simple one. "Are you done letting them do this?" I felt something shift inside my chest, something that had been locked away for too long. Through his eyes, I saw how much I had bent, how quietly I had let myself fold, so I wouldn't disturb the structure of this house. Anger simmered, yes, but alongside it was a new clarity. This night wasn't spiraling toward reconciliation, it was crawling toward truth. And truth didn't ask permission to arrive. My father tapped his fingers on the table. "Well, does he have something to say?" The room leaned toward him like plants to sunlight. But Merrick didn't look at him. He faced me, then turned back to the table with deliberate calm. "If you want to talk about what people bring to a family," he said evenly, "then let's talk about what Asha has brought to yours." The room froze. Forks stopped midair. Even the hum of the refrigerator felt louder. My father's jaw locked. My mother whispered, just audible enough. "Don't you dare!" But Merrick wasn't paying attention to them anymore. His focus was on me, steady, unshaken, as if he were offering me a choice I didn't know I had. And in that locked stare, I realized he was about to reveal a truth I had buried so deep I'd convinced myself it didn't exist. I felt something stir in the base of my spine, a quiet tremor like the very foundation of who I'd been was shifting. Merrick's hand never left the center of my back. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It was measured, deliberate. "Asha has carried more weight for this family than any of you ever acknowledged." The words landed with a thud, not just in the room, but in my chest. I froze. A strange chill crept up my arms, though the air hadn't changed. His voice was pulling at threads I'd kept neatly hidden for years, threads that, once tugged, would unravel everything. Victor's voice snapped like a whip. "You don't know anything about what she's done for this family." But his tone cracked mid-sentence. And my mother's hand flew to his arm, not out of affection, but reflex. Like she was trying to stop him from stepping off a ledge they both knew was crumbling. Merrick didn't flinch. He turned his eyes on my father, then looked back at me as if to say, "You can handle this." Then he reached into the inner pocket of his blazer. He pulled out a thin folder, laid it on the table, opened it. My breath stilled. "These are financial records," he said, "from about 10 years ago. Asha's savings, her bank statements, receipts from wire transfers, all linked to your family business." The room had gone still, but not quiet. There was a pressure, like the air itself was holding its breath with me. "She gave you thousands," Merrick continued calmly, "from her own salary. She worked overtime at a job she hated. She lived frugally. And she funneled everything she could into helping you when your company was 2 months from default." He glanced at my father. "That ledger you kept buried? I found it." I couldn't move. My fingers were numb, my mind racing backward through years of family dinners, snide remarks, quiet dismissals. All the times they said I'd never contributed. All the times they called me dramatic, difficult, selfish. A cousin gasped. My sister's mouth opened, but no words came out. My mother, normally poised like a queen at court, looked genuinely shaken for the first time. I couldn't breathe. I remembered scraping money together in my 20s, skipping weekends out, patching together side jobs just to get by. I remembered the conversations. "It's not enough to really help, but thank you," they'd say. I believed them. Until now. Victor's voice rose, sharp and defensive. "It was a child's contribution. You think that changed anything? I built this with my hands." "And I kept it afloat with mine," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. Lorraine's lips curled. "We didn't tell anyone because it would have embarrassed us. Asking our youngest daughter for help? People would have thought we were weak." I blinked. That sentence did something worse than the shouting. It stripped something inside me bare. Weakest one. That's what I had always been to. Them. Merrick, without shifting his stance, slid another document forward. A printed email. I didn't need to see it to know. He said, almost gently, "And here's an email Victor sent to the bank. He stated Asha had never financially contributed and requested her name be removed from a joint family asset she helped fund." Something inside me folded. I didn't sit. I didn't speak. But I felt my knees threaten to give. Victor lunged for the papers, yelling, "You had no right!" Merrick didn't move. The documents remained. Exposed. Ugly. True. Now the room wasn't quiet. It was chaotic. Gasps. Whispers. Some defending, others horrified. Years of unspoken questions were finding their voices. I stood still in the eye of the storm, watching everything realign. Every memory of being dismissed, every time I was told I was lucky, They let me back in after disagreements, all of it reshuffled in my mind. None of it was care, it was control. I wasn't the ungrateful daughter. I was the invisible pillar. And I had let them build on me until I nearly collapsed. No tears came. I wasn't holding them back. My body was too stunned to cry. But something fierce stirred in the silence. A slow, burning awareness of who I really was beneath the version of me they had invented. They resented Merrick not because he changed me, but because he saw me. And people who depend on silencing you always hate the ones who help you speak. Victor slammed his palm down on the table. The silverware jumped. You think one night of drama changes decades of structure? You're still nothing without us. Merrick stepped in front of me, not as a shield, but like a second spine, a mirror, a silent vow. And then my voice came, low, even, but unmistakably mine. Then let's finally tell the whole truth. The air collapsed, the room stilled. Even the lights seemed to hold their flicker. My mother stood slowly, each motion controlled, like a lioness ready to pounce. And her eyes told me the next words she spoke would burn whatever peace we had left to ash. My mother rose slowly, each movement deliberate, controlled, like someone walking onto a stage they thought they still owned. Her gaze swept the table, landing on each person long enough to signal that whatever came next wasn't just for me. It was for the performance, for the image. Then she turned to me. "You think you can shame this family tonight?" she said, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "After everything we sacrificed to keep your mistakes quiet?" The words weren't a blow, not yet, but they were a warning. She was warming up for a strike she thought would end it all. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears, not from fear, but from knowing what she was about to twist. I'd heard it for years in pieces, in sighs, in passive-aggressive comments behind closed doors. But now she wanted to use it, weaponize it. She stepped closer, folding her arms like she was about to deliver a lecture in front of a disobedient classroom. "We saved you," she continued. "You think your little bank transfers earned you a crown? You lost us money, time, reputation, and we still sheltered you." The room tensed. My aunts exchanged wide-eyed glances. One cousin covered her mouth with a shaky hand. Someone muttered, "Wait, what's she talking about?" I didn't move. Then Merrick's voice cut through the tension, quiet but unshakable. "Tell them the real reason you erased her name from the documents." It wasn't a question. It was a push, one she hadn't expected. My mother's eyes flicked to him, then back to me. Her jaw clenched. The corner of her mouth trembled, not with sadness, but rage barely masked behind dignity. And then she snapped, because she was supposed to be the quiet one, the compliant one. Gasps scattered like breaking glass across the room. That one sentence told more truth than anything she had said in years. They hadn't erased me because I failed. They erased me because I didn't play my part, because I didn't fold myself neatly into the shape of a daughter who could be controlled. It wasn't about the business, it was about power. Around the table, everything cracked. Aunts shook their heads, some in shock, others in denial. Uncles muttered about family roles and tradition. A few tried to defend her. "She's just overwhelmed." She didn't mean it that way. But I saw them all, clearly, finally. I saw the masks they'd worn for decades, the ways they used loyalty like a leash, affection like currency. Victor, still fuming, pushed his chair back so hard it nearly toppled. He stomped toward me, his face red with humiliation. "You think you're strong now because that man stands beside you?" he shouted. "You're nothing without this family's name." The room recoiled at the volume, but I didn't. I stood there, feet rooted, spine straight. And I answered evenly, "Your name never protected me. It only caged me. Silence hit like a thunderclap. My sister jumped up from her seat, pointing a shaking finger. "You're ruining everything. You're tearing this family apart." But her voice cracked, too. No longer sharp, just shrill. Like a child defending a story she was only just realizing was fiction. I didn't look at her. I couldn't afford to turn back now. Merrick reached into his bag one last time. His face unreadable, his movements calm. "This," he said, pulling out a folded page, "is a consent form, signed by Victor. It shows the business used Asha's assets as collateral, without her knowledge. That's not just betrayal, that's illegal." He stepped past Victor, who lurched forward to grab it. Merrick sidestepped with quiet grace and handed the paper to Uncle Ron, the family's retired lawyer. Ron's eyes scanned the page. His lips parted. This is a binding agreement," he said, voice low. "She had rights, and they weren't just ignored. They were stolen." The reaction was instant. Shouts, demands, questions firing from all corners of the table. This can't be real. How long did they hide this? Did they think we'd never find out? Suddenly, the weight of judgment shifted, and it landed on them. My parents. The image they had spent decades polishing was cracking under the fluorescent lights and the eyes of their own blood. My mother yelled over the noise. "Don't you dare sit there and judge us. You're all hypocrites. Every one of you has secrets." Victor tried to shout over her. "She's been manipulated. This isn't who she is. That man twisted her against us." But I didn't hear the chaos. Not really. I was too still, too focused. Watching them fall apart, I felt calm. This wasn't my family crumbling. This was their mask finally breaking. Their illusion of control dissolving into smoke. And I wasn't in the middle of the wreckage. I was standing outside of it, free. My chest felt lighter, my breath deeper, my body no longer stiff with bracing. The girl who walked into that dinner had been prepared to tolerate, to negotiate, to stay quiet just one more time. She didn't exist anymore. I wasn't the quiet one. I wasn't the invisible helper, and I was never meant to be molded. I turned to Merrick. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His presence was the answer I'd been searching for all these years. I reached down and picked up the ivory napkin I'd straightened again and again to calm myself during this disaster of a dinner. I smoothed it gently, placed it flat on the table, a gesture of finality. "We're done here," I said. My voice didn't shake. Victor called my name. Lorraine, too. I didn't stop. I walked away. Merrick followed without a word. And just as my hand touched the doorknob, one last voice rose behind me. Not to stop me, but to confess something that would change everything I believed about my past. Just as my fingers brushed the cold metal of the doorknob, I heard her voice, soft, shaking, but clear enough to slice through the silence. "Asha, wait." It was Aunt Delilah. Of all the people in the room, she was the one who rarely spoke above a whisper. Always the quiet one at gatherings. Always nodding politely, pouring tea instead of tension. So when she stood, her chair scraping gently against the wood floor, the room stilled once again. "I should have said something years ago," she said, her hands trembling as she clasped them in front of her. "I knew what they did, what they were doing. Her voice cracked. I was scared. She looked down, then back up, her gaze landing on me like a wounded apology. "They told me if I spoke out, I'd be cut off. And after my divorce, I didn't have much left." Her words didn't hit like a betrayal. They didn't sting. They just settled, heavy, real. "I'm sorry," she added, voice lower now. "You didn't deserve to be erased." I nodded, not out of forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. I saw her. and for the first time, she saw me. Then she said something I didn't expect. "It wasn't that they thought you were weak, Asha. It's that they knew you weren't." That sentence hit deeper than any insult I'd received tonight. She continued, voice steadier now. "Years ago, after you helped them during that crisis, they consulted a lawyer. He told them you had leverage. Legal leverage, because the money came from you and you had documentation. If you'd wanted to, you could have taken control. Quietly, legally." She paused, letting that settle. "And they knew it." I didn't speak. Couldn't. The air felt thick again, but this time not with dread, with clarity. "They feared what you were capable of," she said, "so they rewrote the story before you ever had a chance to write your own." I looked over at my parents. My father's body had gone slack, slumped into the chair like the weight of every lie was pressing against his spine. My mother stared at me as if I'd turned into someone unfamiliar, someone unmanageable. Her face showed no regret, just disbelief that I was still standing. My sister wouldn't meet my eyes. Some of the relatives murmured to one another, unsure of where to land now that the performance was over and the curtain torn. And in that silence, I understood something I hadn't before. Their cruelty wasn't rooted in hate. It was rooted in fear. Fear of who I'd become if they let me believe in myself. I turned back to face them all, one last time. "I won't hate you," I said, voice quiet but unwavering, "but I won't carry you anymore." It was a strange sensation, like setting down a bag I hadn't realized I was holding my whole life, the kind that digs into your shoulders, reshapes your spine, makes you forget what standing upright feels like. My mother opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came. And then, finally, my father looked away. That was all the answer I needed. As I turned toward the door again, I noticed something still in my hand, the ivory napkin. I hadn't realized I'd been clutching it this whole time. The same one I straightened over and over at this dinner. The same one I used as a prop, a shield, a distraction. It had soaked up years of silence, of pretending. I walked past the dining table, past the faces that had shaped me, some with love, others with quiet damage. I passed the portraits in the hall, the perfectly arranged sideboard, the tray of untouched desserts. At the front door next to the umbrella stand was a small wastebasket. I paused, and then, gently, I let the napkin fall into it. It landed softly. The sound barely existed, but to me, it felt like the sound of a door closing inside my chest. Merrick opened the door, letting in the cool night air. It hit my face, crisp, unapologetic, honest. We walked slowly down the front steps, the porch light stretching our shadows across the walkway. I didn't look back. My chest ached, but not from sorrow. It ached from release, from finally giving myself permission to walk away from a version of life I no longer belonged to. Every minimized contribution, every backhanded compliment, every whispered correction, every forced smile, every dinner where I shrank myself to fit, gone. The further we walked, the quieter it all became. Not just the noise in the house, but the noise in my mind. When we reached the car, Merrick turned to me. "What do you want to do now?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. "Live a life where I don't apologize for existing." His smile was soft, proud. He opened the car door for me, not out of habit, but out of something more sacred, respect. I sat down, taking one last slow breath. As we pulled away, I watched the house shrink in the mirror. It didn't feel like I was running, it felt like I was reclaiming. The silence inside the car didn't feel hollow. It felt free.